weeks ago. It's not a partisan area of research. It's very mixed. It's a sort of a mixed bag when it comes to who is, as Justin said, who's fighting who the competing interests are, and what's going on. It's not a Republican versus Democrat sort of traditional battle. So it actually transcends that in many ways, and so it's fun to be, at day-to-day going, just, drawing the ire of the eco-left, and then 5 minutes later drawing the ire of big government, crony capitalist Republicans. So we try to thread that needle and stick true to the principles of free market and energy, which, if you're not familiar with our work, is agnosticism on the sources of energy, but a definite perspective that we want energy to come from a free market, from decisions of ratepayers, decisions of the people, rather than government picking winners and losers in the market. And so we started, that's where we sit, and when we stand on issues, everything sort of flows out from that. And so we will represent and defend those principles, not just by coming and speaking to you, but also down at the Capitol when there are both good and bad bills that we feel helps achieve free market principles for the state of Colorado, for our energy mix, for our retail electricity rates that we all have to pay as homeowners and renters, but also as small business owners, and then we pay it the second time to everybody else that has a business, in sort of that double taxation kind of thing, as far as our energy costs are concerned. So we look at all of these sources as basically being neutral. There are a lot of folks who are very pro certain energy sources and very anti other energy sources, and I mean anti as in they don't want any of it ever out of the ground for any purpose at all. And Simon's going to get into a little more of that. We actually do not, contrary to popular belief, oppose wind and solar. I think those are both really cool technologies. What we don't like are subsidies going to those companies, to those areas in the energy industry. We don't like both, very positive and yay renewable mandates that everybody seems to think is a great idea, where you actually force government demand of a certain energy source. And we also don't like punitive regulations, the kind of things that we see in the Clean Power Plan, which is one of the things that has been proposed by the current administration that currently is sitting under a Supreme Court stay, but would obviously heavily penalize first coal and then down the line natural gas eventually as well, with emissions, along with some other regulations. And so we don't like to see those kind of both punitive and promoting efforts being in place, whether it's a federal level or at the state level. So that's the very wonky answer of what we do. We are very active in a lot of conversations, whether it be fracking battles at the ballot box, which is very important certainly this year, but also at the state level when it comes to whatever the state plan is going to be for such a thing as the Clean Power Plan. So we're sort of all over the place when it comes to those kind of things, and the real advantage of being in Colorado is we really can have an impact on policy. A lot of folks like to, move to DC. I spent some time there. The allure of a big paycheck and a chance to be in DC is like a siren call, but I really think that the real policy headway, the real policy action can be had at the state level on these issues, when we can actually make an impact in our own communities, whether that be, just thinking of the Denver metro area, but also across the state. It's a statewide conversation. It's a conversation, especially in energy, that happens across all segments of the population. This isn't sort of segmented off into people caring about education because they have kids. Everybody cares about energy. We all have to worry about how we're going to pay our bills. We all have to make sure that we have adequate, reliable, and affordable energy. And so the conversation really does cut across lots of different lines. And so it's a real pleasure to be here before you today. I'm more than happy to take questions and get into the specifics. We've done presentations on the Clean Power Plan alone that have lasted 3 hours, and so we're not doing that tonight, but if you have a question about the Clean Power Plan, we can certainly address that. We can address other issues that are certainly on top of mind, one of them being a new wind farm that's been proposed by Xcel Energy. It's going to cost $1.1 billion. That's the projected cost. to Excel ratepayers. And we're, as an Independence Institute, we're looking into what those numbers are and why Excel as a company wants to basically fast track that project through the State Public Utilities Commission in basically less than 6 months in order to claim some federal production tax credits. So this is just one example of probably hundreds we could probably talk about. Simon's going to talk about some fracking and oil and gas issues, as well as the confluence of money and politics, which shock is always going to be a election year issue, but especially when it's sort of the eco-left nexus with electoral politics in Colorado. So we'll talk about that. And I think Amy will have 1 or 2 words. Please excuse me. She picked a great time to be sick, and I only mean that as like summer sucks. I've been summer suck. I'd rather be sick in the winter at all. So we'll try to keep her from talking too much. But I'm going to pass it over to Simon and look forward to questions.
This man has the best accent. You'll believe everything he says. Never mind. You won't hear it.
I'm going to try.
She has a great accent too.
Yeah. This is my worst Lauren McCall impersonation. But, and Simon will be way better, so I'll tee him up. But real quick, I want to, does anybody believe there was actually a free market in the energy industry? It is one of the single most regulated industries in the United States. There really is no free market in it. And we actually contemplate that. What would that look like? Do you know that in 1999, the state of Colorado's electricity rates, and let me back up real quick, there's energy policy, and under that are subsets. So electricity generation is one. Michael talked about wind farms. He's talked about oil and gas. But also there is the subset of transportation fuels. So you can't use electricity and energy policy interchangeably. Electricity is a subset of energy policy. But in 1999 in the state of Colorado, your electricity rates at the residential level were about 6 cents a kilowatt hour. We actually, the Independence Institute, wrote a paper in 1999 about how the deregulation of electricity markets in Colorado would actually make your electricity rates cheaper. Think about that. In 1999, we had people at the state capitol who were forward-thinking enough to say, let's consider deregulation. Texas has a deregulated grid. There are parts of Texas where you can punch in your zip code and you can choose your electricity provider by source, by how much you want to pay, by volume. Colorado was actually looking at deregulation. What has happened since then? This is on the electricity side. We had the environmental left come in and Amendment 37, 10% renewable mandate in the state constitution. And as if that wasn't enough, 10% went to 20%, went to 30% renewable mandate. And we say a renewable mandate is predominantly wind. Your electricity rates have gone up significantly, as Michael Sandoval's excellent paper over there will show you. I encourage all of you to get what has happened to electricity rates across all sectors, because you have been forced to purchase electricity that is generated by an inefficient, expensive source that needs backup. It needs backup generation, so essentially you need double. There are a couple of things I just think about when you think about a forward-thinking, free market energy policy, because it's something that really kind of keeps me up at night. What would that look like? Well, I think about cell phones. AT&T was deregulated. Remember, you had to have a landline. You had to, because it was the only way you could hear somebody in Mexico or India or even right down the street. Now, your cell phone, you can talk to anyone, anywhere. I think about it, we deliver electricity the exact same way we did it in the 1930s. It's the equivalent of had Bill Clinton said in 1992, we're going to make sure everybody has access to the internet. We'd all still be stuck on dial-up with AOL, you've got mail. You wouldn't have a cell phone if AT&T hadn't been deregulated. We have to think outside of the grid box. You know where the one place is I always think about, and I'll leave you with this and I'll turn it over to Simon because mine's much more esoteric. These guys are really smart policy people. I think about what is our vision, what should it be? You know, there's one place that is entirely self-contained. We want to look at what it could be like. Think about the United States Navy. They're not powering aircraft carriers with wind and solar. Wind and solar are ancient technologies. They're not new. So when they say new energy economy, throw the BS flag on that. The only thing new about it is the mandate. When they become efficient and affordable, reliable, abundant, all of that, or if you want to put it on your house, I don't care. Be my guest. But don't force the rest of us to do it. But aircraft carriers are off the grid, so to speak. They're entirely self-contained. I think if we rethink how we deliver electricity, and by the way, there's a paper back there that we didn't put out, but as one of our interns explained it, it's like the Hayek of energy policy, of electricity policy. What would it look like if you were doing it all within your own home or wherever you were? They do it with an aircraft carrier, they're nuclear powered. So think about that. It's one thing to play defense, which is what we've done a bunch, and we've done it pretty well. Not all, we're outnumbered in every single area. People, money, lobbyists, all of it. But we have been successful in some cases, and now we're starting to go on offense using the left's own playbook, which is starting to get involved legally. But think about what we could do if we got more creative with how we delivered electricity. And I would encourage you all to grab that stuff in the back before you go. With that, I want to introduce you to Simon Lomax, who's been with us. He's the guy with the best accent in the room, and he can talk about the confluence of oil and gas, fracking, and politics. Simon.
Thank you, Amy, although it's nice to know that there are some people who still find what's left of my accent entertaining, because my wife finds it quite boring and annoying, and that starts on about the third date. Good evening, everyone. I'll try to give you a nickel tour of fracking and the politics of fracking and why there's a good chance you'll be asked to vote on it this November. I come to sort of limited government advocacy, conservative politics after a career in news. So I was a reporter for about 15 years before I decided to get into advocacy, and for a time I actually took some time off journalism and worked on environmental advocacy. So I've got this sort of weird perspective of having worked on both sides of the street and in the middle of the road. And one of the reasons why I love working on energy issues, and one of the reasons why the fracking issue fascinates me, is that as regulated as the energy industry is, as far away from a free market in energy as we are, the story of fracking is kind of limited government in action. It's kind of, you can see the Constitution happening right in front of your eyes when the whole debate over fracking is brought before you. And the reason I say that is that the states created the federal government. And the states said the federal government could regulate some things and it couldn't regulate other things. And one of the things that the states have jealously guarded their sort of authority over has been oil and gas development. And so since the 1970s, really, there's been a really big push from the environmental left to take energy, the responsibility for energy, away from the states and have the federal government kind of come in and usurp that authority. And the story of fracking is one in which the federal government was held at bay and the states won. So in the mid-2000s, really in the late 90s and the early 2000s, a bunch of environmental groups really tried to get oil and gas permitting federalized by getting hydraulic fracturing permitting federalized. And they lost. And because they lost, we have seen in the last 10 years this huge expansion in domestic energy production in the United States. So back in 2005, for instance, when you look at all the energy sources together, we were producing about 60% of our own energy. That's oil, gas, coal, nuclear, the whole bit. We're now bordering on 90% in less than 10 years. And we are within striking distance of being completely energy independent. We've broken OPEC's stranglehold on the global oil market. For the first time in a long time, there's actually a global oil market or something close to it. And all of that is because of small, scrappy, rugged individuals in the oil and gas industry who were able to do what they do because the federal government wasn't allowed to come in and shut them down. So why does it matter in Colorado? So, well, let me say, as soon as the activists lost in Washington, they don't go away, they never give up, because the campaign must always go on. So they took the battle to the states. That was the smart idea, right? Feds couldn't shut it down. So now they want individual states to shut it down. They've succeeded in New York. 2 years ago, New York banned fracking and basically consigned all of upstate New York to the kind of bucolic poverty that people who already have made their money think's really great. But people who want to actually work and climb the economic ladder, they think that sucks. My point is that Colorado is really the next battleground. They want Colorado, which is one of the nation's top energy producing states, to turn against the energy industry. They want Colorado to say, we don't need that anymore, even though we are a state that was built on energy production and mining and agriculture too. We're going to put these measures on the ballot that will effectively get rid of the industry, chase it out of the state. Not because that's in the economic interests of the state, but because they need a win. They need to be able to show their donors that the anti-fracking campaign, the anti-energy campaign, the keep it in the ground campaign, that basically says no kind of extraction of any kind of mineral from the ground is okay. It's all bad. We should go back to the agrarian age. That's really the ideology that underpins all of this. They need to win and win big, and they've picked Colorado, like so many other left-wing sort of interest groups have picked as a battleground, as a place to perform a grand political experiment. So that's why we're hearing about a series of ballot measures that could be voted on this fall. Real quickly, there are sort of two general categories. There's one that would increase the minimum distance that you can drill a well from a building or an area of special concern.
An area of special concern.
Hey, I'm concerned about my old ass. Settle that.
Yes. I think the definition is written broadly enough to include your us.
Right. I'm concerned about my ass, I promise you.
So
It's an area of concern for us all.
it goes from 500 feet. 500 feet is the current standard. They would expand that to 2,500 feet, almost half a mile. That is you draw a circle with a 2,500 foot radius. You're talking about an area of 450 acres. It's 5 times the size of Mile High Stadium and its parking lot. And you're talking about not just one no-drill zone that big, you're talking about tens of thousands of overlapping no-drill zones that are each 450 acres. The state of Colorado has issued a report with some really illustrative maps that show 90% of the state would be a no-drill zone if that setback, if that new minimum distance were imposed.
Say 90%?
90%. In the 5 counties that produce most of the oil and gas in Colorado, that number jumps to 95%. So that's the setback measure. It's an effective statewide ban. The next category, the second category, is a thing called local control.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the one they're hoping that you won't notice how bad it is. They pick local control not because they believe in local control, because all of the groups that push these measures are national in nature. They all support a national ban. So they say they support local control, but let's say, where Amy lives, Weld County, were to have a vote on oil and gas development. I'm pretty confident oil and gas development would get 50% plus 1 votes, and probably a few more in Weld County. These same groups would push for a national ban that would overturn that in a heartbeat. The only reason they're pushing local control is because they figure that it's easier for or it's harder for the oil and gas industry to run against Thomas Jefferson than it is for the oil and gas industry to run against the eco-left and Bill McKibben and all of these people who basically want to put the federal government in charge of everything so the federal government can then come in and shut down almost everything. So local control is the other thing that you'll see on the ballot, but it's not local control at all. It is meant to make oil and gas development, or it's meant to make Colorado as hostile towards oil and gas development as possible by imposing hundreds of different regulatory standards at the local level that are basically designed to say to the oil and gas industry, you are not welcome here, we do not want your jobs, go drill wells in Cheyenne. So those are basically the two big ballot measures. And there's a lot of other stuff on environmental politics that's happening that has nothing to do with these ballot measures, that has to do with who's going to control the state legislature. And if you've heard of a billionaire from California called Tom Steyer, we can talk about him in the Q&A session. But he is in Colorado in a big way. And if you have read the book, The Blueprint, about how the left kind of took over Colorado politics in the mid-2000s, the blueprint is being upgraded into the green print. And Tom Steyer is the money behind that.